The email came through just as I was finishing my lunch. I was sitting at my desk, my eyes still glued to the spreadsheets I had been reviewing for the past few hours, when the notification popped up. Subject: immediate termination notice. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe it was an automated message or a glitch in the system. But the subject line was too real. I froze, my fingers hovering above my keyboard, and without thinking I clicked it open. We regret to inform you that your employment with company name is terminated effective immediately. We appreciate your efforts, but have decided to move forward without your services due to recent actions. You have taken that conflict with the company's interests. My stomach dropped, a tightness creeping up my throat. I could feel the room closing in around me. The words blurred together, but there was no mistaking it. I had been fired. For what? For trying to do the right thing? For trying to protect the company and the people working under me? I wasn't sure what to think. Was this a joke? Maybe some kind of misunderstanding. I scrolled down to read the rest of the email, but I could barely focus. Every word felt like a punch to the gut. Due to your reporting of financial irregularities, it was as though the world went quiet. You've caused disruption in our operations by raising concerns. The matters you reported do not align with the company's current goals and vision. Your last paycheck will be processed by the end of the week. I sat there, in complete shock, trying to make sense of it. My mind raced. Just a week ago, I had uncovered discrepancies in the financial books. Irregularities that pointed to something far more dangerous, a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme within the company. I had followed all the proper channels, reporting it to the CFO and HR. I thought I was doing the right thing, protecting the company from potential financial ruin. This was the response I got. Fired? I barely noticed the buzzing of my phone until it vibrated across the desk. It was Jack, the new boss. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, and answered the call. Hello? Hello? I said, my voice shaking, but I did my best to keep it steady. Hello? Jack's voice was cold, almost robotic. I'm sure you've seen the email. I've decided to let you go. You've caused too much disruption. I'm afraid we can't have someone with your attitude here. You've made things difficult. My chest tightened. You're firing me for reporting fraud? My voice cracked, a mix of disbelief and frustration bubbling up. I've been trying to protect the company, Jack. You understand that, right? I found something serious. Something illegal. He was silent for a moment, then spoke again, his tone growing more indifferent by the second. We have bigger priorities than worrying about a few accounting issues. Should have let us handle it. You didn't trust the process. And now this is the result. I could feel my fists clenching as the anger surged through me. You're covering it up? You're letting it happen, I nearly shouted into the phone. How can you sit there and act like this is okay? How is firing me going to fix this? Goodbye, Jack said, hanging up abruptly. I stood there, phone still pressed to my ear, the silence that followed feeling like the loudest sound I had ever heard. I had just been fired for uncovering a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme, and there was no closure, no explanation, no understanding. Just a cold, heartless decision that left me reeling. I had always believed that the company I worked for valued integrity, that they upheld a standard of excellence not just in their products, but in their financial practices as well. For years, I worked diligently in the finance department, reviewing reports, balancing ledgers, and helping the team stay on track. I took pride in my work, believing that my efforts directly contributed to the company's success. But over the past few months, something didn't feel right. I couldn't pinpoint it at first, but there were small discrepancies, things that seemed off. Yet I brushed them aside as part of the usual chaos that came with corporate life. After all, every company has its ups and downs, its late nights, and the endless flood of numbers to sort through. But the feeling grew stronger. It's the nagging sense that something larger was at play. I remember the first night I stayed late in the office, poring over the year-end financial statements. I had done this 1,000 times before, and the numbers always lined up. But this time something caught my eye. Discrepancy in the accounts receivable reports. A large sum of money had been marked as collected, but there were no records of the payments. My eyes kept drifting back to that single figure. Where did that money go? First I told myself it was a mistake, a clerical error, maybe. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't. I had worked too long in this department to ignore the irregularities now. The next night, I dove deeper into the financial statements, carefully tracking down each suspicious number, each unexplained payment. That's when I found more and more mismatched accounts, more inflated figures, and more inconsistencies that didn't add up. The sums were large millions of dollars. In fact, they weren't just small errors. They were signs of something much more serious, something that pointed to fraud. I felt a pit grow in my stomach as I sifted through the data. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't just poor accounting. This was deliberate mismanagement, or worse. And the more I uncovered, the more I realized that I couldn't just look the other way. I had a responsibility to act, to report what I had found, even if it meant putting my own job at risk. I brought the issue up with my immediate supervisor, an older man who'd been in the company for years. His response? Simple shrug, a quiet muttering about not making waves and not rocking the boat. He said it was nothing to worry about, that the higher-ups would handle it. But my gut told me otherwise. The figures didn't lie. There was something bigger going on here, something that no one else was willing to confront. So I did what I had to do. I reported it. I submitted everything I had uncovered to HR, to the legal department. I thought they would appreciate my diligence, my sense of responsibility. I thought they would see it the same way I did, that this wasn't just a small issue, but a massive problem that needed immediate attention. But instead of support, I was met with silence. Days went by, and no one called me in to discuss what I had found. I followed up, and that's when the tension started to rise. I was told that the matter was being reviewed, that they would handle it internally, but nothing happened. The discrepancies remained unaddressed. And as I continued to press for answers, the treatment from my colleagues, from my superiors, started to change. I began to feel like I was walking on eggshells, like I was the problem. It was around this time that Jack came on board as the new CEO. I was hopeful at first. He seemed like someone who could bring fresh ideas, someone who would clean up the mess and restore the company's integrity. Instead, he reinforced the culture of silence. Every time I tried to approach him with my concerns, he shut me down. He ignored the reports, dismissed my findings, and brushed off the idea that there was anything wrong. I remember the final straw the day I came across a transfer that looked too clean to be legitimate. A series of numbers that matched exactly with the ones I had been tracking before. That's when I realized the scope of it all. The fraud wasn't just a few bad apples. It was a coordinated effort, a scheme that stretched across departments, involving people at the top. I was furious, terrified, but I couldn't walk away. I couldn't let this go, not when I had the proof in front of me. I had already done everything I could, and now I was going to see it through, no matter the cost. I reported it one last time. It's the same process, the same chain of command. This time, it felt different. This time, I knew that exposing this fraud meant something far bigger than just my job, meant exposing the rot that had taken hold of the company I had once trusted. It started subtly. It's like a small crack in a foundation that you only notice when it's already too late. At first, after I reported the irregularities, Jack had seemed to support my actions. He thanked me for bringing the issue to light, and for a moment I thought maybe I had found an ally. Maybe this is the turning point, I thought. Maybe now we'll do something about this. But that initial support quickly started to fade, replaced by something that felt colder, more distant. I remember the first time I saw it during a meeting in the conference room. I was sitting across from Jack and the other department heads, going over the numbers and discussing some potential courses of action regarding the financial issues I had uncovered. It had been a tense meeting, but there was a sense of purpose. In the air as I spoke, detailing the irregularities and their implications, I noticed something shift in Jack's demeanor. He stopped making eye contact, his gaze drifting towards the floor or the window. The usual small nods of agreement were replaced with quiet, almost dismissive gestures. He didn't interrupt, but but his lack of engagement felt more noticeable than anything. By the time I finished explaining, the silence in the room felt heavy, oppressive. Jack was the first to speak, but his words didn't match the concern I had expected. "We'll look into this," he said. The words clipped, his tone colder than I had heard it before. "But we need to focus on getting the project back on track. There are bigger things at stake here." Bigger things. It felt like a dismissive response to something that could cost the company millions. The more I looked at him, the more I realized that something had changed. The support I thought I had seen in him was slipping away, replaced by something darker, something that felt like fear. In the days that followed, the shift became clearer. Jack's demeanor in meetings was distant, and I could feel the growing tension every time I brought up the financial issues. He would deflect, avoid answering directly, or change the subject. His once friendly interactions with me had turned into curt responses, even passive-aggressive remarks that felt pointed. "Maybe we should focus on the bottom line," he'd say, without ever looking me in the eye. "Or we can't afford to make waves," as if it was my fault for trying to do the right thing. One day, after submitting another report on the irregularities, I found my email inbox flooded with responses. But none of them were from Jack. When I asked him about it in passing, he brushed it off. "I've got more important things to worry about," he muttered, his eyes not meeting mine. But it wasn't just the emails or the cold shoulder in meetings. I started to feel the subtle undermining. He'd come into meetings late, refused to address my points directly, or cut me off with vague, dismissive statements. The tension between us was palpable. My reports were being ignored. My questions were going unanswered. And when I pushed too hard, I was met with more silence. One afternoon, as I was walking through the office, I passed Jack in the hallway. I nodded at him, but he didn't even look up. The way he held himself, the stiff posture, the clipped words made it clear that he wasn't just avoiding me. He was actively distancing himself. "Everything okay, Jack?" I asked, trying to break the tension. He didn't answer immediately. When he finally did, it was barely more than a murmur. "Fine, just ... focus on your work." Something in his voice sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just the coldness, it was the underlying hostility. It was as if I had become a liability, something to be avoided, swept under the rug, instead of the person who had saved the company from a massive financial collapse. I knew then that something wasn't right. The boss who had once seemed supportive, even reassuring, had become a stranger. Every conversation now felt like walking on eggshells. Fear of being shut down, of being dismissed, grew with each interaction. I was beginning to realize that Jack wasn't concerned with fixing the problem. He was concerned with covering it up, and I was standing in his way. Summons came with no warning. Jack's email was brief. "Please come to my office. We need to discuss your recent actions." No elaboration. No mention of what was at stake, just a cold, transactional message. My stomach dropped as I read it. I had spent the last few days combing through the numbers again, still finding inconsistencies, still uncovering parts of the fraud that were deeper than I could have imagined. I thought about the reports I'd submitted and wondered if this was the moment I would finally get answers. But deep down, a knot twisted in my gut. I knew this wasn't going to end well. I walked to Jack's office, my footsteps echoing down. The hallway, the weight of what I was about to face, heavy on my shoulders. I could feel the tension building with every step, the uncertainty clawing at me. But nothing could have prepared me for what awaited inside. Jack's office was as sterile and impersonal as always, nothing but a large desk, a few chairs, and shelves of impassive company awards. The blinds were drawn, and the light was dim, casting long shadows across the room. Jack was sitting behind his desk, a single sheet of paper in front of him. He didn't even look up when I walked in. "Sit down," he said, his voice flat. Cold. I sat down across from him, trying to steady my breathing. I could already tell by the way he was acting that this was going to be bad. He hadn't even greeted me. There was no warmth in his voice, no hint of the man who had once seemed. Like he cared about the company's future. His eyes were unreadable, his face tight. Like he was preparing to deliver bad news. "I've reviewed your reports," he began, his tone casual, but the words hit me like a punch to the stomach. and I've decided to terminate your employment. Effective immediately. I blinked, the shock hitting me like a wall. Fired? I was fired. After everything I had uncovered, after everything I had done to protect the company, I couldn't comprehend it. What, Jack? I've been trying to protect the company. I uncovered a massive fraud scheme, millions of dollars this isn't. Just a few accounting mistakes. My voice trembled with disbelief, but the anger was already bubbling to the surface. You can't just sweep this under the rug. We need to address this, not fire me. Jack didn't flinch. He didn't seem moved by my words at all. His cold eyes locked onto mine as if he had already made up his mind, as if nothing I said would matter. You've disrupted the company, caused unnecessary panic, Jack replied, his voice dead, emotionless. This wasn't the right way to handle it. You've put us in a tough spot by going outside the normal channels. It's unacceptable. Unacceptable, I repeated, my anger surging. I followed the channels, reported the fraud to HR. I followed protocol, and now you're firing me for trying to do the right thing. For trying to protect the company. You're supposed to lead? Jack's lips pressed into a thin line. This isn't about doing the right thing. This is about making sure the company stays afloat. The fraud doesn't exist the way you're making it out to be. There's no time for this. No time for it. I stood up abruptly, my fists clenching by my sides. You're covering it up. You're letting it continue because you don't want it to affect your bottom line. People are going to lose everything, and you're just sitting here letting it happen. Calm down, all right? Jack said, his voice losing any remaining sense of authority. He leaned back in his chair, the coldness in his eyes growing sharper. You were a good employee, but you've crossed a line. You're no longer a fit for this company. My pulse was racing, my vision starting to blur with anger. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had trusted Jack, had trusted the company, but here I was, staring at the cold, hard truth. This wasn't about doing what was right. This wasn't about protecting anyone. It was about greed. It was about Jack's power, his position, and his refusal to let the company's corruption be exposed. I reached out and grabbed the termination letter he pushed across the desk, my hand shaking as I stared down at the words. It felt like the ground beneath me had fallen away, like I was suddenly weightless, suspended in disbelief. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to react. I had been blindsided. My loyalty, my integrity, it all meant nothing to him. It meant nothing to the company. With a deep breath, I stood up, taking the letter in hand. I didn't want to say another word to him. I couldn't. He had already made his decision, and nothing I said would change it. I turned to leave, but before I walked out the door, I looked back one last time. Jack didn't even look up. I stood there, in the middle of the office, feeling like the floor beneath me had disappeared. The walls, the desks, the monitors that I had spent countless hours in front of, they all seemed so distant, so foreign now. It felt like I had just walked into someone else's world, a place that no longer welcomed me. I walked down the hallway, the echo of my footsteps too loud. In the empty space, the usual hum of the office, the chatter of coworkers, the faint tapping of keyboards, was gone. Everything was so still, so silent. It felt suffocating. The very air seemed different. I couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. I was fired, just like that. Fired for trying to protect the company I had spent years building. Trying to do the right thing, the weight of it pressed down on me, each step becoming heavier than the last. How could they do this to me? The company, I had trusted the place I had dedicated my time, my energy, my career, it had all just crumbled. And for what? Because I uncovered the truth. Because I tried to stop a fraud that could have ruined everything. How was I now the one being punished? I passed the break room, the spot where I had sat countless times, sharing coffee and laughs. With colleagues, the place where we had bonded over the stress of projects and the late nights, but now it all felt hollow. Couldn't imagine sitting there anymore. How could I face them? The people I had worked alongside, who I had thought shared the same commitment to the company's integrity, were they part of this too? Was everyone just turning a blind eye to the fraud, hoping it would all go away? I kept walking, my feet moving automatically, but my mind was miles away. I reached the office where my desk had been, the place where I had pored over reports, where I had spent countless hours trying to help the company grow, trying to make things better. The desk was bare now, completely cleared out. My computer, my files, everything gone. It was like I had never been there. The emptiness of it all hit me hard. What now? I thought. What do I do now? I had no job, no purpose. The future seemed like an endless void, and I had no idea how to fill it. I walked over to the window, staring out at the city below. The view used to inspire me, used to remind me of the work we were doing, the potential for growth, the goals we were working towards. But now it was just a reminder of everything I had lost. The betrayal stung worse than anything else. Company I had trusted had turned its back on me. Jack had turned his back on me. I had given everything, and in return, I had been thrown away like a piece of garbage. My mind raced with questions that I couldn't answer. Why? How could they think this was okay? I felt the anger rising again, bubbling up to the surface. But there was something else there. Too numbness. A deep sense of isolation. I couldn't believe I was standing in this office, staring out at a future that seemed so uncertain. I turned away from the window and looked around one last time. The office felt like a shell now, a place I no longer belonged. I didn't know if it was the betrayal or the emptiness that hurt more. But I knew I couldn't stay here anymore. I needed to leave. I needed to get out of this place that had once felt like home. But as I walked out the door for the last time, something inside me started to shift. The future was uncertain, but I knew I had to move forward. I didn't know where I was going yet, but I was no longer going to let this define me. The space behind me, once filled with ambition and hope, now felt like a distant memory, fading with every step. And as I walked out of the building, I knew that I wasn't just leaving the company behind. I was leaving the version of myself who thought I had control, who thought I was safe. It was time to rebuild. The silence of my apartment was deafening. It was as though the world had quieted down, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the weight of what had just happened. I didn't even remember driving home. One minute I was walking out of the office, and the next I was sitting on my couch, staring at the termination letter in my hands. It felt like a dream, a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. How had everything fallen apart so quickly? I opened the letter again for the third or fourth time, even though the words were burned into my mind. Your employment has been terminated due to your actions regarding financial irregularities. You will receive your final paycheck within the week. We wish you the best in your future endeavors. The words felt cold, heartless, like they were written by someone who didn't understand what I had given up for this company. I had done everything they asked of me. I'd worked long hours, sacrificed time with family and friends, and committed myself to the success of the company. And this was how it ended. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I thought about the fraud I had uncovered. The very thing I had tried to stop, the very thing that could destroy the company, had led to my downfall. I had done the right thing, hadn't I? I kept asking myself, why does it feel like I'm the one who's been punished? The anger wasn't enough to carry me anymore. It was replaced by something darker, grief, a deep, suffocating grief. Betrayal ran deeper than I could have imagined. Jack, the company, the colleagues I thought I could trust, they had all turned their backs on me. I dropped the letter on the coffee table and buried my face in my hands. The tears came before I could stop them. The floodgates opened, and I didn't try to hold them back. They fell freely, each one carrying with it a sense of loss, of hopelessness, of disbelief. I didn't know how long I sat there, crying, consumed by the weight of everything. The grief felt like it would never end. The frustration, the anger, the sense of betrayal, it all built up, pressing down on me until it felt like I couldn't breathe. I thought I had done everything right. I thought I had a clear sense of purpose, that I was doing the right thing for the company. But now, I had nothing. I had lost my job, my sense of security, my trust in the people I had worked with. I stood, up slowly, my legs unsteady, as if the ground beneath me was somehow unsure. I walked over to the window, staring out at the city lights below. But it was all just a blur. Everything felt numb. The tears had stopped, but the emptiness lingered, gnawing at me, reminding me that this was real. What now? The question echoed. In my mind, I felt completely adrift, lost in the wake of everything that had happened. I had no job, no direction, and I didn't even know where to begin to rebuild. I turned back to the couch, picking up the letter once again. This time I looked at it differently, no longer as a symbol of defeat, but as a reminder. A reminder that I had done something important, that I had stood up for what was right. But it wasn't enough to stop the flood of doubt that surged. Within me, I wasn't sure what came next, or how I was supposed to move forward. But I had to. I sank back into the couch, staring at the letter, lost in my thoughts. I didn't have answers. I didn't know what the future held. But I knew one thing. I couldn't stay here, trapped in this feeling of betrayal and despair. I had to find a way out of it. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting a faint glow across my apartment, but it did little to dispel the heaviness in the air. For the first time since I was fired, I sat down and let the weight of the situation wash over me. I had spent days locked in a fog of disbelief and anger, but now there was no avoiding it. I had to face the reality of what had happened. I wasn't just fired. I had been silenced, pushed aside by a system I thought I could trust. The fraud, the cover-up, the betrayal, it was all real, and I couldn't undo any of it. But I had uncovered something important, something that could change everything, and I couldn't let it go. Had to move forward. I dialed the number 4. The law firm that had been recommended to me, unsure of what to expect. After a few rings, a receptionist answered, and I found myself scheduling an appointment with a lawyer who specialized in wrongful termination cases. Even as I hung up the phone, a strange sense of clarity began to settle in. This wasn't just about fighting for my job anymore. It was about fighting for the truth, fighting for accountability. Later that afternoon, I sat across from the lawyer. In a small, quiet office, the scent of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air, but it couldn't mask the tension I felt. I had been so focused on the betrayal, the anger, that I had pushed everything else aside. But now, I was here, looking at the legal landscape of what had been done to me. So, let me get this straight, the lawyer said, her voice calm but direct. You found irregularities in the company's books, reported them, and were fired shortly after. And now, you believe the company is attempting to cover up a larger fraud. I nodded, trying to focus on her words. I had to explain everything carefully, piece by piece. Yes, I found discrepancies, millions of dollars missing, figures that didn't add up. Seemed like a cover-up, and when I brought it to the higher-ups, they shut me down, and then I was fired for causing disruption. It doesn't make sense? She took notes as I spoke, nodding occasionally. You've got a strong case for wrongful termination, especially with the fraud investigation, but it's not going to be easy. We'll need evidence, a clear paper trail. The company is going to fight back. You'll need to be ready for that. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach at her words. Fighting back? The thought of going up against a multi-million-dollar corporation, especially one that was willing to cover its tracks like this, was daunting. But as she continued to explain my options, I realized that this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about the people who had been taken advantage of. The workers who might be affected by the fraud I had uncovered. The meeting was a wake-up call, a sobering reminder that this fight would be long and difficult. But it was a fight I had to take on. The lawyer gave me paperwork to sign, legal documents to review. There was no turning back now. I left the office feeling a mix of sadness and clarity. I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was starting to see a path. For the first time in days, I felt like I had a plan. I wasn't going to let this go. Back at my apartment, I sat at my desk and looked over the legal documents. The details were overwhelming, but I understood what had to be done. The fraud I had uncovered wasn't going to be swept away anymore. It was time to prepare myself for what came next. As I signed the first of many papers, a sense of purpose began to fill the space that had been consumed by doubt. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for what was right. No matter how hard this journey would be, it was one I was now ready to face. I couldn't just walk away from. this anymore. I needed answers. I needed to understand how I had gone from being a loyal employee to being cast aside like a scapegoat. I called Jack's office, barely able to keep my hands from shaking as I set the appointment. This was at the moment I would finally confront him, the moment I would make him face what he had done. I was no longer going to sit quietly and let him hide behind his power. I had uncovered fraud that could destroy the company, and I had been fired for doing the right thing. This was my chance to demand the truth. As I stood outside his office, the tension in my chest was nearly unbearable. I could feel my heart pounding. As I pushed open the door, Jack was sitting at his desk, his posture stiff and professional as always. But today something was different. He didn't greet me. He didn't ask me to sit down. He didn't acknowledge me in any way. He just nodded at the chair across from him, barely glancing up from his paperwork. I closed the door behind me, my fists clenched tightly at my sides. I wasn't leaving here without answers, and I was damn sure he wouldn't be able to dismiss me like he had everyone else. Jack, I began, my voice steady but laced with anger. I need an explanation. Why was I fired? I followed the proper channels. I reported the fraud, and now I'm out of a job. What is going on? Why did you cover this up? He didn't look up, didn't even flinch. Instead, he exhaled a deep sigh, almost as if my questions were an inconvenience. You're making this more complicated than it needs to be, he said flatly, the words almost casual. You've disrupted operations with your constant questioning. The company's priorities are much larger than the minor issues you keep bringing up. I felt a cold burn of frustration at his dismissive tone. Minor issues? I had uncovered a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme, and he was calling it a minor issue. I took a step forward, not wanting to let him brush me off any longer. No, Jack. This isn't a minor issue, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. People could lose everything because of what's going on behind the scenes, and you're just trying to bury it. You're covering it up, aren't you? You've turned your back on what's right just to protect yourself? Finally, he looked up, but there was no remorse in his eyes, only cold indifference. His lips curled into a thin, humorless smile. You don't understand, do you? You don't know what's at stake here. You're just a cog in the machine. You think the company can stop everything because of your concerns? We need results, not your constant interference. My chest tightened as his words cut through me, the full weight of his disregard. Sinking in, this wasn't about protecting the company. This wasn't about making things better. It was about power, control, and profit. The anger inside me surged again, but this time it was mixed with a painful sense of loss. I had trusted this company. I had given everything to it. Now it was clear that none of it mattered. It was just another obstacle. You're wrong, I spat, my fists clenched tighter. This is not about results, Jack. This is about right. And wrong. It's about integrity. You're throwing it all away because you don't want to face the truth. Jack's gaze hardened, and for the first time, his voice lost its indifference. This conversation is over, he said coldly. You're no longer a part of this company, and nothing you say will change that. Get out. The words hit me like a slap. I stood there for a moment, too angry and stunned to move, but the reality of it sank in quickly. This wasn't a conversation. This wasn't about seeking justice. This was a power play, a clear message that my loyalty and my integrity meant nothing to him. I turned on my heel and walked toward the door, my heart pounding, my head spinning. As I reached for the handle, I heard Jack's voice, low and dismissive. Goodbye, and good luck finding another job, though I'm sure that won't be easy. The words felt like poison, but I didn't turn back. I couldn't. The truth was already clear as the door clicked shut behind me. I stood in the hallway, my fists still clenched, my body shaking with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. I didn't have closure. I didn't have answers. What I had were lies, empty words, a betrayal that stung worse than any firing ever could. But something else was there, too deep, growing resolve. I wasn't done. I wasn't going to let this go. I had uncovered something bigger than myself, something that needed to be exposed. No matter how many times Jack tried to bury the truth, I was going to make sure it saw the light of day. Days following the confrontation with Jack felt like they were moving in slow motion. At first, the weight of everything I had lost, my job, my sense of security, my trust in the company, was unbearable. I spent days cooped up in my apartment, replaying the conversation in my head, wondering where things had gone wrong. But I knew that staying in this space of anger and confusion wasn't going to get me anywhere. I needed to make a change. I had to start rebuilding. I reached out to some old friends, people I hadn't spoken to in a while. The thought of reconnecting felt strange at first, like I was opening a door I'd closed a long time ago. But when I met up with them, I was reminded of something important. I wasn't alone. They listened without judgment, offered support without hesitation. They didn't ask about the details of my firing. They just wanted to know how I was doing, how I was feeling. Their friendship was a lifeline. We spent hours talking, laughing, reminiscing about the past. It wasn't just the fun moments, it was the way they made me feel like I mattered, like I wasn't defined by what had just happened. It was a reminder that there was more to life than a job, more to my identity than the title I had once held. But reconnecting with friends wasn't enough. I needed to take care of myself, physically and mentally. I started going to the gym again, something I had neglected in the chaos of work and stress. The first few sessions were tough. My body ached, and every movement felt like a reminder of how much I had been holding inside. But as the days went on, the routine began to give me something I hadn't had in months: control. I could push myself physically, release the built-up tension, and see progress with every rep. Slowly, I started feeling like myself again. It wasn't just the physical exercise that helped, it was the mental shift. I began focusing on myself and what made me happy outside of work. And I dug out old hobbies I had put on hold: painting, reading, even taking long walks in the park. These activities became my sanctuary. They allowed me to clear my mind, to step away from the anger, the frustration, and just be. But I knew that healing wasn't just about finding peace, it was about moving forward. And so, I started networking. I dusted off my resume and reached out to old colleagues in the industry, asking for advice, seeking out new opportunities. At first, it was intimidating. I had been so focused on the toxic environment I had just left behind that it was hard to imagine jumping back into the job market. But with each conversation, each connection, I began to feel the possibility of something new opening up. It wasn't going to be easy, but I realized something important along the way. I wasn't the same person I had been before. I was stronger, more resilient. The person who had walked into Jack's office hoping for answers was gone. In her place stood someone who knew their worth, who understood that no job, no company could define them. I was beginning to rebuild, and it felt good. I started setting new goals for myself, small goals, like sending out a certain number of resumes each week, or meeting a new person for coffee. With each small success, I built more confidence, more clarity. I wasn't just recovering from the betrayal, I was using it as fuel to create something better for myself. The pain was still there, lingering just beneath the surface, but it no longer controlled me. Every day was a step forward. I wasn't where I wanted to be yet, but I was closer than I had been before. I sat by the window, watching the city come alive as the sun dipped beneath the horizon. The soft orange light painted the sky, casting long shadows across my room. It was peaceful, calm, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt at peace too. The last few months had been the hardest of my life. I had lost everything I thought defined me: my job, my place in the company, the future I had worked so hard to build. The betrayal I had felt from Jack and the company ran deeper than I could have imagined. But now, as I sat in this quiet moment, I realized something that changed everything. I had survived. I had survived the pain of losing something that had been a huge part of my life. I had survived the heartbreak of betrayal. Most importantly, I had survived by staying true to myself. I hadn't backed down when I uncovered the fraud, even when it meant standing up to the people I thought I could trust. I had done what was right, and in the end, that mattered more than anything. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes for a moment, allowing the warmth of the light to wash over me. I was no longer defined by that company, I thought. The job, the title, the position, it didn't matter anymore. Those things had been taken from me, but they hadn't taken who I was. They hadn't taken my integrity, my strength, or my ability to rise above this setback. I had spent so much time reflecting on the past and what went wrong, what I could have done differently, but now I realized that the only thing that mattered was what came next. I wasn't the same person who had walked into Jack's office, desperate for answers. I was someone stronger, someone who had learned to let go of the things that no longer served me. Picked up the phone and dialed a number I had been meaning to call for Deza, a former colleague who had reached out to me about a potential job opportunity. A new chapter, a fresh start. The conversation felt different this time. I wasn't approaching it with fear or uncertainty. I was approaching it with confidence, knowing that I was ready for whatever came next. As the conversation ended and I hung up the phone, I felt something shift within me. I wasn't looking back anymore. I was moving forward. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the horizon. The city stretched out before me, full of possibilities, full of new opportunities. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to take, and this time I was ready. I had everything I needed to succeed, not a title, not a company, but the strength I had built through the hardest time of my life. And as I stood there, staring at the sunset, I knew that no matter what came next, I had the power to overcome it. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving.